In the Kharkiv region, the Russians have conducted attacks from the air and aerial reconnaissance. This time, apart from engaging their artillery, the Russians also deployed their Ka-52 helicopters. Their first line of attack was Prudianka. After a series of unsuccessful attacks, the Russians tried to increase the pressure on the Ukrainian forces and struck Ukrainian positions in the northeastern part of Prudianka, from where the Ukrainians have been countering Russian attacks on Dementievka. The second line of attack became Verkhny Saltov. As you remember, the fights have been going on for several weeks with no progress for the Russians. The Ukrainians are holding a very good defense in the northern and northwestern part of the settlement, so the Russians conducted a flank attack from the east in order to bring more devastation. The third line of attack became Chuhuv, although the Russians did not attack Chuhuv itself, but rather the defense line Korobochkine-Libya's Basilivka. Overall, we can see that the Russians are preparing for another wave of attacks. The fact that they do not focus on any particular region means that they were not able to find an opportunity for a breakthrough. That is why they are trying to damage the Ukrainian defense, anticipating finding weak spots in the combat reconnaissance that going to come later. In the east, the Ukrainian and Russian forces for the most part engaged in artillery duels. In the Sloviansk direction, the main action took place in the village of Krasnopilya. Today the Russians launched another attack on this settlement with the support of their artillery, but by the end of the day this attack was repelled and the Ukrainians maintained control over the area. The Russian artillery was also shelling Dibrovn, Mazanivka, Bahorodich and Mayaki. The purpose of this heavy artillery fire is to set conditions for future ground advances. The Ukrainians in turn are targeting Russian warehouses near Izium with their HIMARS. In the Siversk direction, as the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine reported, the Russians are preparing to intensify their combat operations. The Russians are concentrating their troops in the Belohorivka area, likely to consolidate control of the Luhansk region and prepare for westward advances. The situation around the village of Ryhorivka is still unclear, but it seems like it is still under the Ukrainians because there is not a lot of confirmations of the Russian control. Today not a lot of action was reported, only artillery duels. The Russian artillery continues to target the settlements on the front line, preparing to close the area between Berestov and Spern, while the Ukrainian artillery is targeting the Russian forces in Belohorivka, the Lysychansk oil refinery plant and Yampol. In the Bakhmut direction, the Russians continue working on trying to isolate Bakhmut from Ukrainian lines of communication to the west and south. As the Ukrainians started to heavily reinforce this region, the Russians started to lose their progress, especially around the Volhyska thermal power plant. The Ukrainians also started to engage their western artillery, including HIMARS, in this part of the region, and managed to hit multiple warehouses near Alchevsk and Troitsko-Kartsysk. Unlike the Ukrainians, the Russians are not well adapted to having their warehouses so deep into the region targeted. Ukrainians have a lot of small warehouses that they spread throughout the region in order to minimize losses of their equipment, while the Russians, not being prepared, lost a lot of ammunition at once. So even several HIMARS were able to inflict severe damage and push the Russians to restructure their supply chain. Their logistics will be complicated not only due to the process of restructuring, but also due to the loss of efficiency and not being adapted to a new organization. This also shows that Russian air defense may be increasingly insufficient against Ukrainian strikes. The ongoing operational pause is exposing easily exploitable Russian vulnerabilities. The Russians understand this and are trying to hunt down Western weaponry. One of the main warehouses was reportedly located in Chasiv Yar, which the Russians have bombed very recently, but it seems like it only had ammunition.